The phone rang at 2 a.m., shattering the dead silence of the Chicago penthouse. Enzo De Luca did not answer unknown numbers, but tonight a corrupt precinct captain left a voicemail. The syndicate's untouchable auditor was in federal custody, and she was refusing to speak to anyone but him. The glow of the city skyline cast long, jagged shadows across the mahogany floor of the office. Enzo De Luca stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, staring out at the relentless Chicago rain. He was the undisputed head of the De Luca Syndicate, a man who had built a criminal empire on the bones of his enemies. He was feared, respected, and above all, untouchable. But the voicemail playing on loop from his encrypted burner phone sent a cold spike of dread straight through his chest. Captain Miller from the 21st District was a man Enzo owned, a badge bought and paid for. Miller's voice had been trembling. "Mr. De Luca, we have a situation. A raid went down at the South Loop shipping warehouse. We bagged of your people. Federica Caruso. She will not give her name to the feds. She will not take a lawyer, and she says she only wants to make one phone call. To you." Enzo crushed the phone in his grip, the plastic groaning under the pressure. Federica. Just the sound of her name in the mouth of a filthy cop was enough to make Enzo want to burn the precinct to the ground. Federica Caruso was not a soldier. She was not a capo, a street dealer, or a muscle-bound enforcer. She was his auditor. More accurately, she was the financial architect of his entire syndicate. While his men handled the blood and the territory, Federica handled the billions, weaving illicit cash through a labyrinth of shell companies, legitimate construction firms, and offshore accounts. She was a woman the rest of the underworld dismissed. They looked at her soft, plus-size figure, her quiet demeanor, her thick-rimmed glasses, and her penchant for oversized knit sweaters, and they saw weakness. They thought she was just a civilian number cruncher, a chubby girl who happened to be good at math. Enzo knew the truth. Behind those warm brown eyes was a mind as ruthless and sharp as a scalpel. Federica possessed a quiet resilience that outmatched the toughest men in his organization. She was the spine of his empire, and for 3 years, she had been his darkest, most closely guarded obsession. Enzo had spent his life surrounded by violence, betrayal, and hard edges. Federica was the only softness in his world, a woman whose curves and warmth he craved with a violent hunger he barely kept in check. He kept his distance to keep her safe, surrounding her with invisible guards and showering her with exorbitant salaries just to ensure she never wanted for anything. But now, she was sitting in a holding cell. Enzo grabbed his black wool overcoat and his Sig Sauer. 10 minutes later, a convoy of heavily armored black SUVs was tearing through the rain-slicked streets of Chicago. The tension in the lead vehicle was suffocating. Enzo sat in the back, his jaw clenched so tight it ached. His second-in-command, a scarred man named Matteo, dared not speak a word. Everyone in the syndicate knew not to cross Enzo De Luca when his eyes went utterly dead and flat. The 21st District Police Station smelled of stale coffee, damp wool, and despair. When Enzo walked through the double doors, flanked by 4 massive enforcers, the chaotic bullpen ground to a dead halt. Cops looked away. Paperwork was slowly lowered. The physical presence of Enzo De Luca was a heavy, suffocating weight in the room. He wore a bespoke charcoal suit that cost more than their annual pensions, and the look on his face promised absolute violence. Captain Miller practically tripped over his own feet, rushing out of his office. He was sweating profusely. "Enzo, listen. The feds were running point on this." I tried to stall them. "Where is she?" Enzo demanded, his voice dangerously low, stripped of any warmth. Miller swallowed hard and gestured down the hall. "Interrogation room 3. The feds are furious she will not talk. They are getting a warrant to transfer her to a black site by morning." Enzo shoved past the captain without another word. He reached the heavy metal door of Interrogation Room 3 and opened it. Federica sat at the battered metal table. Enzo's heart seized in his chest, a rare, terrifying sensation for a man who claimed to have no heart. She was handcuffed to the table ring. Her beautiful, thick, dark hair was messy, escaping from the clip she usually wore. Her soft beige trench coat was torn at the shoulder, revealing the curve of her arm. But what made Enzo's blood run ice cold was the darkening bruise swelling on her left cheekbone and the split on her lower lip. Despite the rough handling, Federica was not crying. She was not trembling. She sat with her spine straight, her soft, full figure radiating a quiet, immovable dignity. 2 federal agents were barking questions at her, leaning over the table to intimidate her. But she was staring blankly at the wall, completely unfazed. "Get out," Enzo said. The words were quiet, but they echoed in the small room like a gunshot. The 2 agents spun around, hands instinctively dropping to their holsters. "Who the hell are you?" "You cannot just walk in here," one of them snapped. Enzo stepped fully into the room, the door clicking shut behind him. He looked at the agent who had spoken, his gaze slowly mapping the man's face, memorizing it for a future visit. "I am the man who is going to give you 3 seconds to leave this room before I have my people find out where your wives sleep." Captain Miller scrambled into the room behind Enzo, looking frantic. "Agents, step outside. Now." "That is an order. We have a procedural issue." The agents, recognizing the lethal authority radiating from the mob boss and the panic in the captain, backed away and left the room, muttering curses. The door slammed shut, leaving Enzo alone with Federica. The moment the door closed, Enzo crossed the room in 2 long strides. He knelt beside her chair, completely ignoring the grime on the floor, ruining his trousers. He reached out, his large, calloused hands hovering just an inch from her bruised face, terrified that his touch would hurt her further. "Federica," he breathed, his voice cracking, entirely devoid of the monster he was to the rest of the world. "Who put their hands on you? Give me a name, and he will be dead before sunrise." Federica turned her head, her warm, dark eyes meeting his. A small, tired smile touched her bruised lips. "You came. Of course I came," Enzo said, gently cupping her uninjured cheek, his thumb grazing her jawline. "You are my everything. You are the only thing in this God-forsaken world that matters." "Why were you at the South Loop warehouse?" "I pay people to handle the physical drops. You are never supposed to be in the field." Federica leaned into his touch, her soft curves relaxing just a fraction, now that his towering, protective presence was shielding her. It was a trap, Enzo. Sabrina Hollis. Sabrina Hollis. The name tasted like poison. She was the vicious, calculating leader of a rival syndicate that had been encroaching on DeLuca territory for months. Sabrina was known for her brutal tactics and her desperation to wear the crown of the city's underworld. Sabrina planted a fabricated ledger at the warehouse, Federica whispered, leaning closer so the hidden microphones could not pick up her words. She found out the feds were raiding the place tonight. The ledger was doctored to link your personal bank accounts to the assassination of Judge Carter last year. If the feds found it, you would have gone away for life. No loopholes. No expensive lawyers. Enzo stared at her, the realization washing over him. You went in to get it. I had to, Federica said, her voice steady. I could not let them take you from me, Enzo. I bypassed the security system, got into the office, and retrieved the drive. But Sabrina had tipped off the local beat cops too. They caught me slipping out the back. Enzo felt a surge of overwhelming rage, mixed with a profound, terrifying awe. This beautiful, soft woman, whom his capos dismissed as merely an office girl, had risked her life and her freedom to protect him. She had walked into a federal raid completely unarmed, armed only with her intellect and her fierce loyalty. Where is the drive now? Enzo asked softly. Federica gave a tiny, triumphant smirk. The cops who grabbed me were rough. They threw me against the wall. In the commotion, I dropped it into the storm drain grate by the loading dock. It is gone. Irretrievable. The feds have absolutely nothing on you. You sacrificed yourself, Enzo murmured, his thumb tracing her lower lip. He leaned his forehead against hers. You took a beating and federal custody to keep me free. You foolish, brilliant, beautiful woman. I am never letting you out of my sight again. Now, I just need you to get me out of here, she whispered, her facade of strength finally cracking slightly as a tremor ran through her body. I am walking out of here with you, or I am leaving this precinct in body bags, Enzo promised. The extraction was remarkably quiet, yet thick with unspoken violence. Enzo did not use lawyers. He used leverage. It took him exactly 12 minutes and a brief, hushed conversation with Captain Miller, involving a Swiss bank account transfer and a thinly veiled threat against the captain's daughter in college. The federal agents tried to intervene, but the district police suddenly developed a massive failure in their paperwork system. Federica Caruso was released pending further investigation, released directly into the custody of Enzo De Luca. The rain was coming down in sideways sheets when they finally stepped out of the precinct. Enzo stripped off his heavy wool overcoat and wrapped it around Federica's shoulders. The coat dwarfed her, engulfing her curvy frame in his scent of expensive cologne, tobacco, and gunpowder. He wrapped his arm tightly around her waist, shielding her from the downpour and the prying eyes of the street, hurrying her into the waiting back seat of his armored Maybach. The heavy doors slammed shut, sealing them in a soundproof cocoon of rich leather and ambient warmth. Matteo climbed into the front passenger seat, signaling the driver. The convoy pulled away from the curb, merging into the dark, wet streets of the city. In the spacious back seat, Enzo pulled down the privacy partition, completely isolating them from the men up front. He turned to Federica, reaching into the hidden compartment to pull out a first aid kit. The interior lights cast a dim, amber glow over them, highlighting the sharp, dangerous angles of Enzo's face and the soft, vulnerable beauty of hers. "Let me look at you," he commanded gently. Federica turned to him, clutching his oversized coat around her chest. Enzo poured antiseptic onto a gauze pad. His hands, usually so steady when holding a weapon or signing a death warrant, were trembling slightly. He carefully dabbed at the split on her lip, his chest tight with a violent mixture of adoration and fury. "I am fine, Enzo," she said softly, reaching up to wrap her warm, plush fingers around his wrist. You do not need to look so terrified. I held my own. You should not have had to hold your own, he replied, his voice rough. You are a civilian. You are my auditor. You sit in a safe, warm office, and you make magic with numbers. You do not walk into police raids, Federica. When I heard you were in custody, I felt my heart stop. Do you understand me? I have slaughtered men for looking at you the wrong way, and tonight you were in a cage with animals. Federica looked deeply into his dark eyes, refusing to back down. Her hidden resilience. The iron will beneath her soft exterior flared to life. And what was I supposed to do? Let Sabrina Hollis destroy you? Let the feds lock you away? I know how your empire works, Enzo. I know the books. But I also know you. I know the man who built a sanctuary for me when the rest of the world told me I took up too much space. I know the man who listens to me when everyone else talks over me. I was not going to let them take you. Enzo stopped breathing for a second. He stared at her, overwhelmed by the depth of her devotion. The underworld saw a chubby, quiet accountant. Enzo saw a queen, a woman who possessed more courage in her soft, beautiful body than every armed soldier in his syndicate combined. He dropped the gauze and cupped her face with both hands, his thumbs stroking her cheeks. Sabrina Hollis is going to die for this, he promised, his voice a lethal whisper. By tomorrow night, her syndicate will be ashes, and I will bring you her head. But from this moment on, you are mine. Completely. No more hiding behind professional boundaries. No more pretending I just value you for your accounting skills. I am obsessed with you, Federica. I want you by my side, as my partner, as my woman. Federica's breath hitched, her dark eyes wide as the confession washed over her. She had spent years harboring secret feelings for the terrifying, beautiful mob boss, assuming a man like him would never want a woman who looked like her. You mean that? She whispered. With every dark, twisted piece of my soul, Enzo swore. He leaned in, capturing her lips in a fierce, desperate kiss. He tasted the metallic tang of her blood and the intoxicating sweetness of her mouth. It was a kiss that claimed her, a vow forged in violence and absolute devotion. Federica melted against him, her hands tangling in his dark hair, pulling him closer as the adrenaline of the night finally caught up to them. But the moment of dark, romantic bliss was violently shattered. The Maybach suddenly swerved with a violent lurch, throwing Federica hard against Enzo's chest. Tires screamed against the wet asphalt. A deafening crack echoed through the cabin as a high-caliber bullet slammed into the bulletproof glass right next to Enzo's head, leaving a spiderweb of shattered glass in its wake. Enzo instantly shoved Federica down into the floorboards, covering her body entirely with his massive frame. Get down and stay down. Up front, the privacy screen dropped electronically. Matteo was holding a submachine gun, his face pale in the dashboard light. Boss, we have a major problem. We are being funneled. Enzo looked up, peering through the rain-streaked, cracked windows. They had just entered the lower levels of Wacker Drive, a subterranean network of streets running beneath downtown Chicago. It was a concrete labyrinth, poorly lit and notoriously isolated. And currently, both ends of the tunnel were blocked off by heavy garbage trucks, trapping the DeLuca convoy inside. Through the downpour, Dozens of armed figures began to step out from behind the concrete pillars. They were not wearing police uniforms. They were wearing tactical gear, carrying assault rifles, and leading them was a figure standing under the harsh glare of a sodium street lamp. Sabrina Hollis. She had sleek blonde hair pulled tightly back, and a cruel, mocking smile playing on her lips. She raised a hand, signaling her men to take aim at the trapped SUVs. Enzo looked down at Federica, shielded beneath him. The raid at the warehouse, the arrest, the interrogation. It was all just bait. Sabrina did not want the ledger in the hands of the feds. She knew Federica would go to the warehouse. She knew the cops would arrest her. And most importantly, Sabrina knew that Enzo De Luca would do exactly what he had just done. He had left the impenetrable fortress of his compound, abandoning protocol and safety, rushing out into the open city in the middle of the night for one single reason: to save the woman he loved. Sabrina had used Federica as the ultimate lure, and Enzo had walked blindly into the kill box. Enzo pulled his Sig Sauer from his holster and racked the slide, his eyes burning with a murderous rage. He looked at Federica, pressing a hard, fleeting kiss to her forehead. "Stay down, my love. Let me show them what happens when they threaten what is mine." The subterranean tunnel of Lower Wacker Drive erupted into a deafening war zone. The heavy, rhythmic thud of assault rifles echoed off the concrete pillars, the muzzle flashes illuminating the darkness like a strobe light in hell. Bullets rained down on the De Luca convoy, tearing through the metal chassis of the lead and rear SUVs. The armored Maybach in the center withstood the initial volley, but the reinforced glass was already webbing, struggling against the concentrated armor-piercing rounds. Enzo kept his body draped heavily over Federica, shielding her soft, trembling frame with his own. His heart pounded against her back, a furious, steady rhythm that grounded her amidst the chaos. He was a creature of the underworld, entirely in his element in the face of death. But the thought of a single stray bullet grazing her paralyzed him with a fear he had never known. "Matteo, boss, they are flanking us," Matteo shouted from the front seat, reloading his weapon with practiced mechanical efficiency. "We are pinned. We cannot reverse, and the barricade ahead is solid." Enzo fired blindly through the shattered gap in the window, dropping one of Sabrina Hollis's men who had ventured too close. "We hold the line. Call the armory. Tell them to send every soldier we have to this exact coordinate." Matteo ducked as a spray of bullets shattered the side mirror. "Comms are jammed. They set up a local scrambler. We are completely cut off." Federica squeezed her eyes shut, her cheek pressed against the rough fabric of the floor mat. The smell of sulfur, burning rubber, and copper filled her lungs. She was terrified. She was a woman of ledgers, spreadsheets, and quiet strategy, not gunfights and blood. But as she listened to the hopeless exchange between Enzo and Matteo, something deep within her shifted. The panic receding, replaced by the cold, calculating logic that made her the most dangerous auditor in Chicago. She knew this city. She knew it not from the streets, but from the blueprints, the property deeds, and the municipal bribes she managed every single day. She opened her eyes, her mind racing through the schematic of Lower Wacker Drive. "Enzo!" Federica yelled over the deafening roar of gunfire, grabbing the lapels of his suit to pull his ear close to her mouth. "The western wall. 10 yards to our left." Enzo looked down at her, his dark eyes wide with frantic confusion. "What are you talking about? Keep your head down. Listen to me," she demanded, her voice cutting through the panic with surprising authority. "The western wall, between the 3rd and 4th concrete pillars. There is a steel maintenance door painted to match the concrete. It leads to a decommissioned utility network. I know it is there because I audited the shell company that bribed the city inspectors to seal it off the public grid 5 years ago. It is our smuggling route for the riverfront properties. Enzo stared at her, the realization washing over him. The underworld saw her as soft, but her mind was an iron trap. She held the keys to the entire city in her head. "Does it lead to the surface?" Enzo asked, his voice steadying. "It connects to the old subway maintenance tunnels," Federica confirmed, her warm brown eyes locked onto his. "It will spit us out 3 blocks north, right into the basement of the theater district. But the door has an electronic mag lock." Enzo did not hesitate. He trusted her implicitly, with his life, with his empire. "Matteo!" He roared over the gunfire. "Grab the thermite charges from the trunk cache. We are making a run for the western wall." Matteo did not question the order. He unlatched the heavy divider and scrambled into the back, tossing Enzo a spare tactical vest and a heavy assault rifle. Enzo ignored the vest, instead wrapping it securely around Federica's chest, tightening the straps over her soft curves. "When I open this door, you run exactly where I tell you. Do not look back. I will be right behind you," Enzo commanded, his face inches from hers. Federica nodded, her jaw set with a fierce determination. "On 3, Enzo shouted. 1, 2, 3. Enzo kicked the heavy Maybach door open. He and Matteo stepped out simultaneously, laying down a punishing wall of covering fire. The sudden aggression forced Sabrina's men to duck behind the concrete pillars, buying them a precious 3-second window. "Move!" Enzo grabbed Federica's hand, yanking her out of the car. They sprinted across the wet, debris-covered asphalt. Federica pushed her legs as fast as they could go, her heart hammering against her ribs. Bullets chipped the concrete at their feet, sending sharp fragments of rock flying into the air. Enzo kept himself positioned between her and the line of fire, a human shield willing to take 1,000 bullets before letting one touch her. They hit the western wall. Federica ran her hands frantically over the damp concrete, searching for the seam. "Here!" she cried out, finding the faint outline of the hidden door. Matteo slapped the thermite charge against the heavy steel lock and pulled the pin. "Get back!" The 3 of them huddled behind a massive support pillar. A blinding white flash and a searing hiss filled the tunnel, melting through the heavy locking mechanism in seconds. Enzo kicked the scorching steel door, and it groaned open, revealing the pitch-black maw of the utility tunnel. "Get in!" Enzo pushed Federica into the darkness, turning back to fire one last burst at the advancing mercenaries. Matteo followed, but as he crossed the threshold, a bullet caught him in the shoulder. He grunted, stumbling forward into the tunnel. Enzo grabbed Matteo by the collar, dragging him inside before slamming the heavy steel door shut and throwing the manual deadbolt. The deafening roar of the gunfight was instantly muffled, replaced by the eerie, dripping silence of the underground network. They were plunged into total darkness. Enzo pulled a tactical flashlight from his belt, the harsh beam cutting through the damp, dusty air. He quickly inspected Matteo's shoulder. It was a clean through and through, but he was losing blood. "I am fine, boss," Matteo wheezed, leaning against the cold brick wall. "Just get us out of here." Enzo turned to Federica. She was breathing heavily, her messy hair plastered to her forehead. But she stood tall, looking back at him with an unwavering gaze. She had not broken. She had not crumbled. "Lead the way, my queen," Enzo said softly, the title slipping from his lips with absolute reverence. Federica nodded. She took Enzo's hand, her plush, warm fingers anchoring him in the dark, and guided the most feared mafia boss in Chicago through the labyrinth of the city's underbelly. The safe house was a sprawling, opulent penthouse located in the Gold Coast, registered under a dummy corporation that only Federica knew existed. It took them an hour of navigating the damp tunnels and a quiet, tense car ride in a stolen sedan to reach it. The moment the heavy steel reinforced door locked behind them, Enzo dispatched a doctor for Matteo and immediately turned his attention to Federica. He led her to the massive marble bathroom, gently stripping away the heavy, rain-soaked tactical vest and his ruined overcoat. He ran a warm washcloth over her face, carefully cleaning the dirt and dried blood from her bruised cheek. His touch was agonizingly tender, a stark contrast to the violence he had just unleashed. "You saved our lives, Federica. You saved my empire." Federica looked up at him, her dark eyes flashing with a dangerous, newfound fire. "I did not save it just so Sabrina Hollis could take it tomorrow. She thought she could trap you by using me. She thinks she has won because she chased us into the dark." Enzo cupped her face. "She has signed her own death warrant. My men are assembling. We go to war at dawn." Federica shook her head, placing her soft hands over his calloused ones. "No. Dawn is too late. War is too messy. You let me handle the first strike." Enzo frowned, confused. "What can you do from here?" Federica stepped out of his grip and walked into the living room, grabbing the encrypted laptop she had stashed in the safe house months ago for emergencies. She sat heavily on the velvet sofa, flipping the screen open. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. "Sabrina is a brute," Federica said, her voice dropping into the cold, clinical tone she used during boardroom audits. "She understands bullets and turf. But her syndicate operates on logistics. She needs money to pay those mercenaries. She needs clean routes to move her weapons. She thinks I am just a chubby girl who files your taxes, Enzo. But I am the ghost in the machine." Enzo watched in silent awe as Federica's fingers began to fly across the keyboard in a blur of motion. Lines of code, offshore bank routing numbers, and encrypted ledgers reflected in her thick-rimmed glasses. "I am accessing the Cayman servers," she narrated, her eyes locked on the screen. "Sabrina uses a trio of shell companies to wash her cash. I am not just freezing them. I am rerouting every single cent of her liquid assets into the Federal Treasury's anonymous donation fund. It cannot be legally reversed." Enzo smirked, a dark, predatory smile spreading across his face. "You are bankrupting her." "I am not done," Federica said, her jaw clenched. "She sent men to kill you. She put her hands on me. She deserves nothing left standing." Federica opened a new terminal window. "I am accessing the GPS transponders on her incoming weapons shipments at the port. I am broadcasting those exact coordinates to the rival Russian Bratva, the DEA, and the ATF. Simultaneously. Her entire supply chain is going to be seized or stolen in the next 20 minutes. She hit the enter key with a resounding clack. "It is done," Federica breathed, leaning back against the sofa. "Sabrina Hollis has no money, no weapons, and by morning, her own lieutenants will turn on her when they realize they are not getting paid. She is a queen without a kingdom. Now you can go finish it." Enzo walked over to the sofa, completely captivated by the brilliant, ruthless woman sitting before him. He knelt between her legs, resting his hands on her soft, wide hips, pulling her flush against his chest. He looked up into her eyes, seeing his own darkness perfectly mirrored in her warmth. "I have spent my whole life looking for someone who could stand beside me in the fire," Enzo murmured, kissing the pulse point on her neck. "I just never realized she was sitting in my office the whole time." "Bring me her ring, Enzo," Federica whispered, tangling her fingers in his dark hair, fully embracing the shadows she had finally stepped into. "I will bring you her entire world on a silver platter," he promised. 3 hours later, the rain had stopped. Enzo De Luca, flanked by 30 heavily armed enforcers, kicked down the doors of Sabrina Hollis's headquarters. The resistance was minimal. The mercenaries, having just received frantic calls that their offshore accounts were drained and the weapons shipments seized, had abandoned their posts. Loyalty bought with cash evaporated the second the cash disappeared. Sabrina was standing in her office, screaming frantically into a telephone, her composed facade completely shattered. When Enzo walked in, the phone slipped from her hand. "How?" Sabrina gasped, backing away until she hit her desk. "My accounts, my shipments, everything is gone. It is impossible." Enzo raised his Sig Sauer, his face an impenetrable mask of pure, unadulterated menace. "You made a fatal miscalculation, Sabrina. You thought my strength was in my guns. My strength was sitting in an interrogation room while you thought you were winning. You let an accountant run your empire." Sabrina spat, a desperate, hysterical laugh escaping her lips. Enzo leveled the gun at her chest. "She is not an accountant. She is the underboss of the De Luca Syndicate, and she sends her regards." Enzo pulled the trigger. When Enzo returned to the safe house as the sun began to rise over the Chicago skyline, the city belonged to him completely. He found Federica asleep on the velvet sofa, exhausted from the adrenaline and the night's trials. He carefully scooped her up in his arms, marveling at how perfectly she fit against him, her soft curves a sanctuary from the blood on his hands. He carried her to the massive bed, laying her down against the crisp white sheets. As she stirred, opening her warm brown eyes, Enzo slipped a heavy gold signet ring from his pocket. It bore the De Luca family crest. He slid it onto her finger, a physical vow binding them together in the eyes of the underworld. They had tried to use her as his weakness. Instead, they had awoken his greatest weapon. From that night forward, the underworld learned a terrifying new truth. Enzo De Luca ruled the streets with an iron fist, but it was Federica Caruso, the brilliant, beautiful queen with a mind of ice and a heart of fire, who truly held the keys to the kingdom. And God help anyone who dared to forget it. Did the ruthless tension and dark romance of Enzo and Federica's story keep you on the edge of your seat? If you loved watching this brilliant, plus-size auditor outsmart the entire underworld and claim her rightful place beside the Mafia king, hit that like button. Leave a comment down below, telling us your favorite moment. Share this gripping tale with your fellow dark romance fans. And do not forget to subscribe for more thrilling, high-stakes stories.